Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, a preview of what could be one of the most consequential presidential debates.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will square off on a Philadelphia stage for the first and perhaps only time before November's election.
With so much at stake, who has the edge, and can we even cover this like any other presidential debate? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Tonight's debate has a lot to live up to. You'll recall the first presidential debate of this election cycle went so poorly for President Biden, he ended up dropping out.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
Since then, his vice president, Kamala Harris, was chosen. She's consolidated her support in the party, launched a national campaign, made a VP pick, and staged a convention.
Let's get out there, let's vote for it, and together, let us write the next great chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told.
And after all of that, the country finds itself right back where it started, bitterly divided and facing an election that will likely come down to a few thousand voters in a handful of states. Joining us now is Al Jazeera English White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett. Okay, so Kimberly, the first debate of the fall campaign is always one of the most hotly anticipated events in any presidential election. And now we're about to have a second debate. And of course, this year is far from normal, so the anticipation is truly off the charts for this one. With so much at stake, why don't you try to walk me through the respective game plans for both sides and what a successful debate might look like for the Trump and Harris campaigns?
Let's start with Kamala Harris, because that's where all the focus is. And really, for Kamala Harris, this is a big test. This is her first primetime TV test, and she needs to nail this. And in some ways, we've already seen, because there is so much pressure on the vice president, there is already this almost downplaying of expectations that is going on from the campaign. And it's a good strategy because she's human. She doesn't have the TV experience that her counterpart, Donald Trump, has. I mean, he has been a showman for decades. And so she's at a disadvantage right there. So I think her campaign recognizes that. So there was a big debate between the two campaigns, a duel, if you will, about whether there would be muted mics, whether there wouldn't be muted mics.
The candidates' microphones will be muted when it's not their turn to speak. They also will not be allowed to bring any notes, and they'll not be able to question one another.
So that is one thing that is going to be there. The other thing that we know about it is that there are going to be no opening statements. There's only going to be a closing statement. And we also know that Donald Trump won the coin toss, which means he gets to choose whether or not he wanted the closing statement to be last, and he won that. And so in terms of prepared notes, they're not going to have any.
Yep.
They have a pen and paper, a glass of water. And yeah, we know that this is largely going to be domestic issues or maybe a little bit of foreign policy, but we don't really know what the topics are going to be. But we know that they'll have 2 minutes each for their answers. And there may be some rebuttals as well, but it's going to be strict to the time.
Yeah, in terms of the overall theme of the debate, I remember the last debate between Trump and Biden was the Trump campaign wanted to make it about strength versus weakness, and it couldn't have gone better for the Trump people in that case. What do you think the overall theme might be for this debate?
Well, I think the challenge this time, again, the pressure is on Kamala Harris, because when you look at the polling, everybody knows what Donald Trump's about.
Our country is being poisoned, and your schools and your children are suffering greatly because they're going into the classrooms, they're taking the seats, and they don't even speak English. It's crazy.
The American people aren't really watching this debate to learn more about Donald Trump. They already know. They've seen him as a president. They've watched him on TV. They know who this guy is, but they don't really know who Kamala is, even though she's been vice president. So this is her opportunity, but it's really a fine line in terms of the tightrope walk that she has to do. What the polls are showing right now is that Americans want change. So she has to say that I am that change, while at the same time not criticizing the administration she's been a part of.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. How do you not criticize Joe Biden, the man you've been working alongside? And so what we're seeing is the campaign basically saying, we've done a lot of good work, but there's still work to be done. And so this is going to be difficult for her, and she's really got to knock it out of the park. And I don't know if you can do that in one debate.
What are the main issues, and do they matter at all? That's after the break. So, Kimberly, obviously there are issues that each will want to emphasize. For example, Trump will want to steer the conversation towards immigration. Harris might want to talk about abortion rights. But these debates are rarely won and lost on the issues alone. So I have a two-parter for you here. Tell me about some of the critical issues in this race. We should cover that. But also why demeanor and personality and poise play such a key role in how voters evaluate these candidates.
Well, first of all, to answer the last part of your question, I think we only have to look to Kamala Harris's first sit-down interview that she did with her running mate to understand just how important optics are. She didn't get a great review overall for that interview.
They took like the most anticipated interview in 40 days, and it felt like a stale bag of nuts from a vending machine.
She was sitting there with her running mate, and the body language, she was slumped over on a desk. She looked shorter than her running mate, and she wanted to be the president of the United States. And here her vice president running mate is almost a foot taller than her. I mean, I don't understand why it was set up like that, because the campaign should have recognized what a mistake that was. And then sort of the lack of confidence that was projected as she answered. And so those optics were caught by the audience. And so she's got to make sure she doesn't make those kind of mistakes again, because in this television medium, those things, people, whether they're recognizing it or not, are digesting and making judgments about the candidate have nothing to do with policy. She didn't have strength. She didn't have confidence. She looked unsure of herself, and that hurt her. Now, with regard to the issues, Kamala Harris has also been criticized that she's been very vague in terms of her policies.
The Kamala Harris website remains vague. There's bios for her and her running mate, Tim Walz. There are events and donations. There's merch. But there are noticeably no policy stances.
In fact, it's interesting. Just on Sunday evening, her campaign finally put out an issues page. But it reads just like it was written by Joe Biden's staff. I've listened to all of his speeches, and some of the phrases are identical. And then one of her biggest criticisms is that it's still scant on detail, and yet when you look at some of the details, they're still pretty flimsy. For example, one of the biggest areas where she could be criticized is immigration. And yet, when it comes to immigration, on this issues page of her website, there is just a single paragraph. And all it says is she acknowledges that it's a broken system and it needs to be reformed. Well, we've known that for 20 years. But what's your solution?
What you're saying is so interesting, and it speaks to just how complicated electing a president is for American voters, because the candidates need to project that presidential authority, but they also have to be someone who they will accept in their living rooms for 4 years. So it's a really tightrope to walk. And it sounds like Harris is the one who has to pass that because Trump has already been president.
100%. And where Kamala Harris wins in terms of persona is in projecting hope. And there's no question across the board, people in the United States are so tired of the discourse. They're so tired of the division. And they're looking for something different. And so what we saw initially when Biden dropped out and passed the top of the ticket to Kamala Harris was this incredible surge of enthusiasm. When I covered the Democratic National Convention, I have not seen enthusiasm like that since Donald Trump came onto the stage, and then prior to that, when Barack Obama came onto the stage.
Yeah.
And in my mind, the election was won, just based solely on nothing other than the enthusiasm and the fact that the stadiums were standing room only. I mean, it was just electrifying.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
And just based on the fact that people were looking for something to hang on to me, it seemed like she had captured it. Now, in terms of the polling, too close to call. The New York Times poll that just came out on Sunday has given a slight advantage to Donald Trump. The remainder of the polls nationally still have a Harris lead.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say. But if you look at the Kimberly Halkett unofficial enthusiasm of the last sort of 3 major candidates that I've covered, just looking at enthusiasm, it would be Harris.
Okay, Kimberly. Do we fall into this trap every 4 years, putting way too much stock in these debates? Hillary Clinton is said to have won all 3 of her debates against Donald Trump in 2016. That didn't matter. I guess the questions are, does it matter who wins this debate? Or, to put an even finer point on it, with a country this divided, is it even possible to evaluate who wins this debate if everyone is in their separate media bubble telling them exactly what they want to hear?
Yeah, it's definitely possible to win, and it's possible to lose. We saw that with Joe Biden. He was finished.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how well sometimes you do in the debate. What matters is the court of public opinion. And if you are, eviscerated in the press or in the court of public opinion, it's over. But in terms of, is it possible to win? Yeah. But I think what matters more is the takeaways of the American public and how the media reports it and how the campaign spins it, either campaign. And so that's why we already see both campaigns going into this with strategies of how to play it. For the Harris campaign, they're going into this sort of lowering expectations. And I think that's smart, given the fact that Kamala Harris is at a disadvantage in terms of this medium next to Donald Trump in just the fact that she hasn't done it as many times. But we've talked about the fact she does have the advantage. She's a prosecutor. She looks better on television than Donald Trump. But the Trump campaign is going to attack Kamala Harris on issues of the economy, on issues of immigration, and the fact that she's also kind of waffled on some of her policies, and she's got that challenge of trying to distance herself from Joe Biden and make herself distinct. And that, honestly, I think is going to be the hardest part.
Yeah.
How do you do that? That's what I'm most interested in, is seeing how she's going to pull this off.
Kimberly, thank you so much.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Khaled Soltan and Chloe K. Lee, with Philip Lanos, Hisham Abu Salah, Hagir Saleh, Duha Mosaad, and me, Kevin Hirten, in for Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Joe Plord mixed this episode. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.